morning, everybody. It's 8 o'clock, and so we will get started on our regional dialogue. It's great to see you all here today. We're looking forward to this conversation very much as we delve into the issues of big data and public transit. Many of you already know me, but I am Kimberly Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Leonard Transportation Center. And I'd like to invite Greg Holsizer from HNTB to give us a few words.
Thank you, Dr. Collins. On behalf of my colleagues at HNTB, thank you so much for attending today. These regional dialogues are always so informative, and it's great to connect with each other. As I was thinking about today's topic, it took me back, about 25 years or so when I was had the privilege of serving as the general manager of the 91 Express lanes. And I remember we'd been open for like 3 or 4 months, and I pulled my team together and I said, okay, I need to know this stuff. I need to know who our best customers are, where they live, where they're traveling to, how much they're spending with us, how many times a week are they using, all kinds of information like that. And I remember them looking at me like I was crazy. They said, we have this little thing called Crystal Reports. Any of you remember Crystal Reports? This little report writer hangs in the back, right? We have this thing called Crystal Reports, but it's going to take 4 days to get even one little bit of that information. I said, that's not acceptable. I said, well, that's the best we can do. So I'm really excited to hear today about how far we've come in 25 years, because it's just going to blow my mind, I'm sure. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers, our participants. Looking forward to a great dialogue. Thank you, Kimberly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Greg. Again, it's always great to have the support of HNTB and all of your colleagues. I don't know if Carrie's here today, but really, it's been a pleasure to really engage with the organization of HNTB and their support. As you all see, there is a Spark brochure and sort of agenda for the day. I hope that you open that up and take a look. It provides the overview of the dialogue, what we plan to do today, some of our, again, just our general agenda. I would like to start by thanking our staff, Kathleen Ramirez, and of course, Danny Chung, who's here helping with all of the background and support for the dialogue. They've done a great job. Many of you might not know this, but this is Kathleen's last dialogue. So we want to give her a special, yay. As Kathleen moves on with doing other exciting things within her life. As we talked about improving mobility through big data, we're going to talk a bit about what can data do for us to help us reconceptualize our mobility and our how we move across our communities. Is looking at mobility as a service. So what is your awareness of mobility as a service? And this is one of the main themes that we'll be carrying throughout the conversation today. All right, so we see that there is between very high and moderate, just a few who are low and no very low. So we'll see as we discuss today, sort of this concept of mobility as service and what data can do for us in helping to improve, again, the mobility question. We want to do our next question, and then we'll invite the Dean to join us. Okay, our second question here, what should be the primary uses of public transit? The primary uses, of transit data? Understanding travel time, promote equity, ensure access, maximize ridership, or all of the above? Results on that one. So as you can see, it's all of the above, sort of just a softball question out there to get us thinking really about, again, the use of big data and public transit. With that, I'd like to invite my new dean up, Shanti Srinivas. Dean Srinivas, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Good. This morning, speaking of big data and technology and so on, I walked into my office about 15 minutes earlier than the meeting, turned on my computer, there was a software update. So that's one of the reasons why I'm out here in the conference room. But good morning, everybody. And on behalf of the JHBC, welcome to each and every one of you. We're so happy you're here. And one of the, as was pointed out, I'm fairly new to San Bernardino, but not new to the CSU system. I used to work at Cal Poly Pomona and was there for the last 30 years. And I'm delighted to be here. And one of the things that I have been observing here at San Bernardino is the strong ties with the community, as demonstrated by the dialogue that we are having here. Now, before I launch into the rest of my introductory remarks, I wanted to make sure that I do recognize our speakers, Antoinette Meyer from SANDAG, our folks from the transit agency, Joshua Landis, who's planning manager at Foothill Transit Agency, Jeremiah Bryant, Director of Strategic Development at Omnitrans, Kristen Warsinski, Director of Planning, Riverside Transit Agency. Delighted that you're all here to speak and on this very important topic. As we know, the big data has so much potential for impacting what we do here in the Inland Empire, both in terms of increasing efficiency, enhancing customer service, loyalty, and sustainability, and so many other things. And I think the real challenge that we all have here is the amount of data that's being collected every day on even what we're doing right now, and how to use that information quickly in a coherent way so that it can inform our decision making. So today's topic is extremely timely, as we can imagine, and also relevant for what we do here. I also want to thank our sponsors, our platinum sponsors, San Bernardino International Airport, Mike Burrows. There's so many people on the screen that I'm not able to see everyone, but thank you, HNTB Corporation. I did see Greg Hulsizer and HNTB Vice President and Carrie Witt, Vice President. And then San Bernardino Valley College, our gold sponsors, Woodruff, Stratton, and Smart, Metrolink, Ontario International Airport, and our silver sponsors, Advanced Civil Technologies, EXP, Foothill Transit, Omnitrans, Lane Construction, GLA, GIDA Surveying, PMP Groups, VCS Environmental, S2 Engineering. Wonderful. As you can see, as I was saying in the beginning, our community partnerships are vital for what we do here at the JHBC, as well as for our students. So we thank you for your participation. And last but not least, I want to recognize our LTC Research Challenge students, Holly Chia, Martin Colasso, Preston Reed, Jaya Radhakrishnan, Sheng Tang, Daniel Uematsu. Thank you all so much, and I hope that you find today's presentation timely, useful, give you some insights. I also want to thank our director and our associate Kimberly Collins and our associate director, and as well as our staff member Kathleen Ramirez. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Dean Zernovas. It's great to have you here, and we're looking forward to working with you over this next year as you provide your leadership to our college. Okay, with that, I'd like to turn it over to our transit agency speakers, starting with Jeremiah Bryant from Omnitrans, and then we'll have Josh Landis, and then Kristen Warsinski Josh from Foothill Transit, Kristen Warsinski from the Riverside Transit Agency, and we're calling them one speaker, but they're really our panel of transit speakers. Please.
Good morning. I'm Jeremiah Bryant, Director of Strategic Development here at Omnitrans. And I'd like to talk a little bit about using data to improve transit and really about understanding trade-offs. So a quick background on Omnitrans. We are the transit agency that provides service to the Cal State campus. We provide service to the San Bernardino Valley, which really starts from the east in Yucaipa and runs to the LA County line, where we abut with Foothill Transit, and then to the south to the Riverside County line, where we connect with RTA. We cover 15 cities, about 450 square miles, and the population there is about 1.5 million people. We offer a family of services that's really designed to match the service we provide with the needs of the community, and those service levels and the family of service is really a data-driven approach to make sure we're putting the right service in the right place. That family of services includes bus rapid transit lines, which are the SBX Green Line outside of Cal State San Bernardino, a series of local and express routes, paratransit service for ADA qualified riders, microtransit service, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and then special transportation services, which are specialized services for those senior and disabled. Pre-pandemic, we carried about 11 million passengers on a little over 160 buses. Looking at that second question that Dr. Collins asked, what do we use data for? And I think if most people ask me what's data for, I think the most common response that we get about transit agencies really goes to what I think people think our core mission is, which is maximizing transit ridership, looking at big data, looking at all data to figure out how to figure out where people are going and how to get more people there than any other choices we have, using our resources effectively and efficiently. I think though, when we look at the mission of transit agencies, maximizing ridership is an important element, but it's only one element. And I think when we look at the data needs for an agency, big data, small data, whatever data, it's really important to understand the mission, because the mission tells us what type of data we need, what are our policy objectives. And I think if we look at that, yes, we do look at big data, we do look at cell phone data, we look at the millions of data points that we collect on a daily basis from how people pay, from where people are getting on and off, to understand travel patterns and ridership. But it's probably equally important for us to look at trade-offs related to access and equity, making sure that we're providing services, not just where it's most heavily used, but across the spectrum for the service we serve. We also need to look at travel times to make sure that we are getting people to where they need to go effectively, using our resources effectively. There are trade-offs related to productivity and coverage. Again, that's back to ridership versus access. I think something that's always interesting for us and always a trade-off that we need data for is we have an established core network where we know where the riders are going. And then there's always new development. We have greenfield development, and there's questions for how do we serve that? And is there a trade-off between serving what we know versus what's new? And how do we make those recommendations to our board? And then I think the type of data that we go through just continues that. And I know Josh and Kristen will talk about a lot related to equity and amenities coming up shortly. So I think one of the key data points that we look at is sort of transit activity. Where are people getting on and off? Here is a map that shows daily activity on our buses. The darker the green circles, the more green circles, the more activity there is in that area. The lighter the green circles, the smaller green circles, the less activity there is. What you'll see is there's clear clusters. I mean, if we look at downtown San Bernardino, along Holt Boulevard in Ontario and Montclair, in Colton and near Hospitality in San Bernardino, we clearly see these large clusters of activity. In those locations, we're really trying to figure out how to maximize our use. When we look at some of the other circles here, those that are highlighted or circled in red, we still see areas that are important. Chino Hills, a JPA member, has much lower ridership activity than many of our other cities. Same thing with the community of Bloomington, North Upland, or Yucaipa. But when we look at these areas, we look at data in slightly different ways. If we look at Ontario, here we've got just a couple of different ways we can look at data. On the left is a chord chart, which allows us to look at travel patterns. Here it's travel patterns of not current transit riders, not all trips, but people we've identified as potential transit riders. Those are trips that sort of match the general demographics of our riders. And we can see that one of the things that was most important there is Ontario to Ontario travel, or Ontario to Fontana, Ontario to Rancho Cucamonga. The same thing we can see in the two charts to the left. The one in red is commute patterns from the city of Ontario, where residents of Ontario are going. The one in blue is where people are coming from outside of Ontario into Ontario. And I think when we look at data like this, it helps us prioritize some high value projects. We're working in partnership with San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, SBCTA, on our next BRT line, the West Valley Connector, which runs right through the heart of all those dark red areas in Ontario. So using data helps us place those large investments. On other hands, on the next slide, we can look at sort of data that we have that's not big data, but data that we have in-house from surveys. And here's a data dashboard. Greg mentioned Crystal Reports. I've run Crystal Reports a bunch in my life, but my favorite tool right now is Tableau. It's just a great way to go from data to visualization very quickly. And what Tableau does is this is a summary of 10,000 surveys from our writers. And if you look here, you have on the top origins, on the bottom destination, so we can see where people are going. We can see the trip purpose on the left as well. If you click one more time, we can then zoom into any area. So just for the sake of looking at Cal State San Bernardino, we can zoom in and say, hey, if people are starting their trip in Cal State San Bernardino, where are they going? And here we've been able to isolate the origin, see the distribution of travel patterns, and then we make decisions about our local routing based on data like this. Another thing that we look at is in areas, like I mentioned with Chino Hills, where our ridership was clearly lower than other locations, we pick a different member from our family of services. Last September, we launched a service called OmniRide. It's a micro transit service that's designed to sort of act like a TNC, like Uber and Lyft, and take people directly from an origin to their destination. Now, here's a case where we really focused on improving access, probably more than improving ridership. When we launched OmniRide, with using the same resources as fixed route service before, we increased access to residents in Chino Hills by about 70%, from about 46,000 residents to about 80,000 residents. And here we can use Tableau and sort of the data we collect on a daily basis to sort of look at what our times of travel are, which are the bar charts on the right, where people are going. And then more importantly, for efficiency's sakes, we can look at where people are going by time of day and look to position the vehicles correctly. So what you see on the top is where all the trips are going. The next chart is where activity is at 7 a.m. The bottom chart is where activity is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we can position vehicles correctly accordingly. I think the key thing for us when we look at data as a transit agency is collectively, Omnitrans, Foothill, RTA, we collect millions of data points a day. We have lots of data. We can analyze the data. We can analyze trip patterns. But the real question is, what are our policy objectives? How do we turn that data into something meaningful? And then how do we make recommendations to our policy boards so that we can effectively use that data to achieve the goals of the agency? With that, thank you for your time. And I think I'll take questions at the end, or is that how? Take questions at the end after all of the transit agencies have gone. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Josh Landis. I'm the planning manager at Foothill Transit. So a quick overview of Foothill Transit. We operate in the Pomona and San Gabriel valleys of East Los Angeles County, 327 square miles, and about 1.5 million residents. Very similar to, I think, Jeremiah's points there. Prior to COVID-19, we had about 12 million boardings per year, 39 local routes and express routes. We actually have 343 CNG buses, and we have one of the largest electric fleets in the country. So a quick overview, like I mentioned, with ridership, over the years, we have seen a slight decline in ridership, with the biggest dip, in the past year and a half that we've been managing. And here's kind of another visual of the kind of ridership decline and what we have going on so far this year. Just to kind of give an overview of, this is some of the big data that we use, kind of in transit, ridership is our key metric. So as I was looking at this topic of big data with the view of ridership, I wanted to focus on this discussion of equity. And so starting with the Pomona Transit Center, there's 9 Foothill Transit lines. We also connect with Omnitrans. And I wanted to hone in on one of our lower performing routes, line 197, that operates from Pomona Transit Center to Montclair, as a way to demonstrate how big data can give us a guiding path, but there's also some subjectivity needed when analyzing the efficiency of a route or whether or not we should make any improvements. Here's kind of a quick map of Line 197. And that area that I honed in on is the city of Pomona. So looking at our data points, our reference ridership, it's not the highest performing route that we have. And there's been declines even prior to COVID-19. Another metric that we use when analyzing the efficiency of a route is the boardings per vehicle service hour, which essentially means how many people are riding the bus per hour, right? It's about an hour route. And so once again, we've had a steady decline in the boardings per vehicle service hour. But what I wanted to kind of focus on is just because the route is performing lower than what we would design as kind of optimal, there's still this greater need to have an equity component. So we look at census data as kind of another reference point. So the area that I have here kind of highlighted with the red circle is a high poverty area. And so the route serves a greater need to the community than just how many people ride per hour. This is kind of some more block data, but this is the block in particular, the census block, where the route travels along. So even though it's not it doesn't have a full bus every single hour, it still serves a need for that community. And I also kind of highlight so this is the income, poverty. The next slide, we'll talk about also some minority. Once again, this is a high minority population area. So we have high poverty, high minority. Before making those types of big decisions of what to do, to improve efficiency, maybe change the routing. These are some of the elements that we look at. I'll kind of zone in some more on that block again. And this is all in the city of Pomona, where the route picks up a majority of the customers and travels to Montclair. So this slide is exactly the same as the other slide, but it really focuses on next steps, right? So what should we do? We know the route isn't performing that well, and it's taking that big data and applying it to some kind of concept. And what we're working on at Foothill Transit is identifying these routes that serve a bigger purpose than just trying to get people on the bus. And so for this community, this route in particular, it actually serves that function of providing service, providing access to members of the community that are have higher in poverty and minority groups. And from that, I'll pass it on to Kristen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kristen Morsinski. I'm the Director of Planning at Riverside Transit Agency. And I just wanted to thank you for having us. We're excited to be a part of this, this dialogue series. So RTA is the transit provider for Western Riverside County. We have 22 member jurisdictions and a service area that covers 2,500 square miles. So a very, very large service area. We right now are running 32 local fixed routes and 4 commuter routes. And we are currently planning a microtransit pilot program for the Hemet and San Jacinto area. We also offer dial-a-ride service with curb-to-curb advanced reservations for seniors age 65 and above and persons with disabilities. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about data and how we use that when we're planning for bus stops. So we receive requests for upgrades to bus stops or for placement of bus stops. We receive tons of requests for this every year. And with our large service area and over 2,500 bus stops within that service area, we had to come up with a process for placing bus stops and deploying amenities, which are like shelters, benches, and trash cans, and even where to put some of our mobility hubs or transit centers. So with that large service area, how do we decide where to put these bus stops? We had to look at a multifaceted approach to bus stop deployment. Because our service area is so large, we have urban, suburban, and rural areas that we serve. As you've heard from the gentleman that went before me, it's not all about data. Data certainly helps drive our decisions, but there's also equity. There's also making sure that we're distributing things where they make sense and where they're going to benefit the wider audience. So we look at things like density, trip generators, which are things like stores or medical facilities, social services, schools, things like that. Minority and low-income populations, where those are located. Population needs. So if there's a large senior community or a senior center or a school, then there might be a special need for transit there. And then geographic location, again, trying to be equitable and spread things out as much as we can. So here's one of our maps that we used recently in our Title VI program. And this map, as you can see, we have key destinations and facilities throughout our service area. We have all of our routes plotted on this map, but we also layered in minority population percentages so that we can see where those minority populations are within our service area. So a map similar to this would be something we would use if we were looking at planning a new route and we were trying to place bus stops along that route. Where we put those bus stops matters, and data can help drive that decision and help us to really plan those routes accordingly. So we would drill down on a map like this and look at the specific area that we're working on. We also have a board-approved bus stop strategic policy, which the board passed that in 2015 as a way to try to maximize our limited resources. We have all of those bus stops that I mentioned, and every time you install shelter and a bench and a trash can, that takes a person to maintain those things, make sure that we keep them up to our standards, keep them clean, keep the trash changed, deal with graffiti and things like that. So we can't just put them out everywhere, because we would need a staff of, I don't even know how many people to be able to take care of that. About every 25 to 30 shelters that we deploy, we find that we have to hire a new stops and zones person to help us make sure that we maintain them. So the policy really aims to do two things. One is to maximize benefits. So to install these amenities at the busiest stops, the stops with the highest ridership, to make sure that most people are benefiting, but we also had to ensure equitable distribution. And when we look at that, we're looking at two things. We're looking at the geographic equity, so make sure that we're spreading it out among those 22 member jurisdictions that we have. And then also we're looking at social aspects, special needs, schools, senior centers, medical appointments, things like minority and low-income populations. We're looking at all of those things to drive our decisions, and a lot of data is involved in looking at that. So here's a sample of some, I wouldn't call it big data. This is data that we collect. We collect daily ridership on and off at every bus stop throughout our entire system. So all of those bus stops I mentioned, we have all of the ridership data, and we look at this data when we're making decisions on where to place amenities. So if you can see here, we have in the top set of data, the highest ridership stops that don't yet have a shelter, bench, and trash can. So first we look at that, and we do half of whatever our yearly allocation of amenities is, we put on those busiest stops that are feasible for us to upgrade. And the second half is based on equity and geographic location. So then we take every jurisdiction that got something, so to speak, in the first set wouldn't necessarily get something in the second set. And the policy states that no one jurisdiction can get more than 15% of the amenities for each year. So we really try to make sure that we're spreading out what we're deploying in our service area. So this just kind of talks quickly about how it's broken down into two tiers. The ridership tier and then the equitable distribution tier. Once we do that, then we also have to go to the jurisdictions, and we have to find out from them if they have any data on a stop that maybe might be more appropriate. They may have something that they've heard about that, maybe there's a new school going in or something's going on where they think a shelter is more appropriate at this spot. Maybe there's a reason why a shelter wouldn't work at the spot that we've identified. So then we work with our jurisdictions to really fine tune where we're putting these bus stop amenities. So in closing, just thank you again for having me. As you've heard, transit really relies on data in all of our decision making. And not only do we have to look at data and use big data to really drive what we're doing, but we also have to remember that equity and geographic distribution matter as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for those great presentations. We do have one question. We usually are going to take them at the end, but I think just to kind of answer just a couple questions out there, I believe this question is for you, Josh. The question on Route 197, why wouldn't you consider microtransit? Perhaps achieve a better LOS and a lower cost per ride?
looking at my CEO, seeing what his head nod is. And so, so we've looked at the concept of microtransit over the years, and I could probably go on a big tangent as to why it doesn't fit for us at this time. We've looked at it mainly to, if we were to start kind of a microtransit pilot, I think our focus would be on some of the rail connections to kind of build that ridership there. It still serves that purpose on a fixed route. We have the set times. We just don't have the infrastructure at this time to kind of create a microtransit. We've looked at other types of partnership, but I think it goes to the first poll question of mobility as a service. So what other types of mobility programs are out there to partner with either the city or other kind of partners out there, whether it's a kind of a hybrid type of model or other elements to include. But for us, we don't have the kind of resources for a microtransit type of service. Bus, even simple as bus availability, the operators and that infrastructure in place.
All right, thank you, Josh. So let's move on to our poll questions, our next set of poll questions, and we can delve into this a bit more. We do have time after all of our presentations for a Q&A. Our next question is, do you take transit as part of your commute? As we saw some of those data that shows. All right, so here we have, and this is actually depending, I think, where we live and where we go, but we had 16% say yes and 32% sometimes. So those are great numbers to see out there. And then 51% saying no. So those are actually some higher numbers than we have for the IE in looking at those who take transit for work. So our next question. So a lot of you are going to be all real great experts on transit and how it works within our region. Our next question is, what are some of the barriers to riding transit? So we have shifting work schedules, perceived security issues, price, trip planning schedules, and then an other. And if you do mark other, if you'd be willing to raise your hand and let us know what that other might be, that'd be great. All right. So here we have with 83% participating, which is a good response rate, I have to say, for those who do surveys. We had sort of the majority, 67%, so 2/3, saying that it's really trip planning and schedules that's making the difference. And so this is the importance of thinking about mobility as a service and how we can alleviate some of those issues with trip planning and with scheduling. So thank you again for participating in our poll. And again, it's our way to kind of pull you out of just behind your camera there on your desk and really engaging with our material. Now I would like to invite up our Student Research Challenge. This is our second year of having a research challenge in which we bring together faculty and students from Cal State San Bernardino, Cal Poly Pomona, and the University of California, Riverside. We have a really great group of young people, of students now working on the issue of big data and transit within our region. And they're going to share some preliminary pieces of their research to you, because it's, again, they've just started only about a month and a half ago. So they're just getting their research design ready to go. But I'd like to invite them forward to give their presentation. Welcome.
Okay, so my name is Holly and I'm part of the student research group. I'm from California State University San Bernardino and in the MBA program. So this year our team has decided on 2 topics for research, and we've divided into 2 different teams. So I'll speak on the first topic and then my colleague Daniel will speak on the second topic. So we'll start off with our group's topic that's and include is Preston, myself, and Sheng working on this. So we're looking at using big data to analyze the effect of COVID-19 on the public transportation. So in this, we're going to look at the system before, during, and after COVID, how it was affected and how in turn that affected other persons using the system. When we talk about after COVID, obviously we know this is not finished yet, but we're speaking of just when areas have opened back up to business. And so that would impact the numbers, and going forward, depending what happens, that will be accounted for also. So 3 specific areas that we're looking into are 1, looking at ridership, arrival time, and energy consumption during that time frame. We're going to look at comparing different areas, different routes, and see what type of any correlations that we may find there. Also, we're going to look at the social equity aspect and seeing how that was impacted through COVID and transportation system access. Just really quickly, a few of our motivations why we chose this topic is just knowing that COVID has affected many businesses, including the transportation industry. And instead of just looking at the ridership numbers going down, we'd like to see an opportunity to take this to point out any weak points that we can strengthen in order to have a stronger system going forward post-pandemic. We're also all personally interested living in this area and going through this pandemic together to see what we can do to help contribute. Also, we looked at the California Transportation Plan for 2050 and see this as one of the priorities of the plan going forward, just dealing with seeing how COVID affected the area as well as social equity. And in that, their goal is, I'll just read it, California's safe, resilient, and universally acceptable transportation supports vibrant communities, advances racial and economic justice, and improves public and environmental health. So we're looking forward to contribute to that. Just quickly, a few of our initial findings. We first focused on the Riverside area, and thankfully we received data from the Riverside Transit Agency from periods 2018 to 2021. And we started analyzing a few of the routes before, during, and then coming out of the pandemic and opening up areas for business. So first we looked at the fixed, sorry, I think I skipped a slide. Okay, here's the fixed route buses. And here we can see from July 2018 to June 2021, we look specifically at ridership. And here we can see between February and April 2020 was this significant drop in ridership. That was about 71%. And that's of course when there were closures and in the midst of everything. Another thing we noted was just a trend that every October there are certain peak areas of ridership. So you can see that in 2018, also 2019. And it was interesting to see also through 2020, though it's significantly less, there's definitely a peak there in October in the ridership of the fixed route services. Sorry, okay, here we go. Next, we looked at the dial-a-ride services from 2019 to 2020. And here there's the big drop between February and April again, of course, and that was around 85%. That's for the dial-a-rides and taxis. Next, we did a comparison of about 4 different routes that we saw to be the most ridership. So the busiest routes, a lot of that is around the downtown area. So that's Route 15, 19, 1, and 27. So here we see a mapping of those 4 routes and the differences in change of ridership between 2018 and 2021. So for the first route, for Route 1, there was about 69% decrease between February and April 2020. For Route 19, it was about 59% decrease. For Route 15, about 68% decrease. And Route 27, about 67% decrease. So this is just all between February and April 2020. Our plan moving forward is we'd like to extend our data analysis to do some more between the different lines of Riverside and then extend those methods to other agencies. Also, we'd like to concentrate on, now that the areas are opening, our post-COVID data analysis on ridership. We'd also look to compare ridership with population, income, and vehicles per household and analyze if method of payment is any indicator of accessibility and efficiency as far as using cash or using transit app and whatnot. There's 2 more areas we'd like to look at, and one is opportunity mapping, which we saw from a study from Washington State Transportation, where they used using the social mobility as well as the transportation system to map. Here we can see they used an opportunity index from very low to very high. And they used several different indicators in order to determine this. This was education economic health, housing and neighborhood quality, transportation mobility, and health and environment, and just mapped the routes and stops according to that in order to help make decisions. So we'd like to take a look at that in different areas. And here in their study, they defined opportunity as a situation or condition that places individuals in a person to be more likely successful to excel. And so we thought that would be interesting to look at. The last one is looking at quantifying social equity in transportation. So in this study, they used the Lorenz curve, which is typically used in income inequality. In this instance, they used it to map against transportation and accessibility to transportation. For this, they used a Gini coefficient in order to quantize it. And with that, they used including population, income, ethnicity, and several other factors in order to see the relation of transportation services provided to the population in those areas. So we're interested to do this going forward. I'd like to now pass it off to my colleague Daniel to speak on the second topic that we'll be working on. Thank you.
So the second student research challenge group will focus on optimizing bus arrival time predictions. So our subgroup comprises Martin Koyazo, Jay Rakrishnan, and myself, Daniel Waimatsu. So yes, we'll go over our leading questions, some of our initial findings and research, our objectives, our progress, and then finally our future goals for the year. So leading questions. So we wanted to find ways to use big data to increase public transit's reliability for riders. And we'll be doing this by looking how to improve bus on-time performance. This will help reduce trip scheduling barriers for riders and give better estimates of bus arrival times. We also want to investigate how bus reliability will help us get the results of improved ridership. Right, so some of our key findings while investigating the possible solutions to some of these questions were related to route prediction, algorithm development, and optimization, right? So in particular, we learned that an SVM algorithm, and SVM is it's a type of machine learning algorithm. It increased bus prediction times in one case by 20%, right, the accuracy. We also learned that considering dwell times in algorithm development results in far better prediction accuracy. And dwell time is the time that a bus waits at a stop during a trip. So we also learned that rider perception is very difficult to track and has high variance from region to region. So yeah, these three findings, they help guide our group to investigate the effectiveness of the algorithms similar to SVM and neural networks, but analyzing their effectiveness on bus on-time performance in the Inland Empire. Right, so how effective could these algorithms be if applied to the Inland Empire's bus systems? Right, so these leading questions and initial findings help define our project objectives. Right, so we'll be creating algorithms to improve arrival time and dwell time estimation accuracy, and then analyzing those algorithms' successes and limitations when applied to the Inland Empire bus systems. We're also considering multiple routes for their ridership and rider satisfaction in relation to their arrival time accuracy. Right, so additionally, so far we needed to show a need for scheduling optimization for dwell time and arrival time. So to investigate the effectiveness of some of the current arrival time estimations, we looked at 2019 and 2020 data sets from Foothill Transit's Route 280. So Route 280 is in the western part of the Inland Empire, right around West Covina, and it runs up and down Azusa Street. from the Azusa Transit Center down to the Puente Hills Mall. And so in our analysis, we found that the existing prediction methods for 5 of the 12 stops shown right here were very accurate. The scheduling arrival time and actual arrival time were very close. But the remaining 7 of the stops had light to moderate room for improvement. Just a closer look. We're going to be taking a look at three of the stops, right? So one is 782 from Roland to stop 775 from Arrow. It's about 6.5 miles, and then we'll be moving on to stop 733 at First Street. That's about 3.3 more miles. And these stops are northbound on Route 280's northbound. Yeah, so again, these stops are 3 of the 7 with optimizable arrival times, right? So the 2 graphs here, they plot average departure time offset. And average departure time offset is the difference between scheduled departure time and actual departure time. The departure times reflect the influence of traffic, distance, and dwell time on bus arrival time. Right, so you can see the graph at the top, it calculates average departure time offset based on days of the week. And the graph at the bottom calculates it based on hour of the day. Right, so 2 important insights from these graphs. One, that there is significant room for improvement, right? We can see that on stop 75 on the top graph, stop 775 in blue, right there, it had an average departure time variance of about 5.5 minutes on Saturdays, whereas Sundays it was much more accurate, right? But secondly, and somewhat more interestingly, we can see that the variance follows a somewhat predictable pattern, right? So we're going to see how different algorithms can reduce the departure time offset with big data. So we can consider, things like peak hour of the day, route length, weather, bus speed, ridership numbers, etc. And this will allow us to find which external factors are kind of determining these patterns and affecting the dwell and arrival times. So future goals. So our goals for the year are to, 1, analyze the effect of dwell time offset at a stop, which will give us insight into how dwell time offset might affect the scheduling algorithm for that stop. Then we'll be creating predictive models for arrival time by utilizing big data to give insight to the many factors that affect arrival time. Then we'll analyze these models' effectiveness and limitations on improving scheduling. And then we'll understand how overall ridership can be improved as a result. Yes, these are references, and that concludes our presentation. Thank you all for your time and attention, and for this section, Jay and I are available on this call.
All right, thank you so much. It's great to hear from future leaders in our communities about what they're looking at specifically with public transit and the big data that goes behind it. We did have a couple of questions that maybe we could just get to before we have the full group discussion a bit later. So what technologies are utilized to gather geographical and ridership information? I don't know if any from our research challenge group or from our public transit agencies would like to respond to that.
As far as ridership, we get that data from either our farebox or we have automated vehicle locators, and they kind of have people counters on the bus that capture ridership at the location.
All right, thank you. Jeremiah, did you have any, or Christian, anything to add to that?
I think Josh was right. We use a lot of onboard systems, automatic vehicle locators, APCs, automatic passenger counters, our fare boxes. And then it's really, how do we take that information and turn it into useful information? In which case we usually run it through different systems. We use a program called TransTrack, which is a data warehouse and reporting tool. And then we also run a lot of that analysis through Tableau, which allows us to visualize things. I think the other question was, do we use data to improve performance on our on-time performance, reliability, and things like that? And I'd say yes. I have a team of schedulers that spend basically their entire day working on how to continually optimize our services in terms of travel time. And there's a lot of ways of looking at it, very similar to what was just presented by Daniel, but there are also a lot of look at variance, because variance is really one of the things that really drives a lot of those changes, and how do you minimize the variance?
All right, thanks so much for that. Kristen or Josh, did you want to add anything?
I think that sums it up for us. We have all the same things. We have the APCs, the passenger counters. We use our fare box or GFI to gather ridership information. And then Clever Devices is on all of our buses, and we can tell bus stop by bus stop what the ridership is based on that as well. And then as far as improving the system, on-time performance is something that we're always looking at. We're always aiming for above 85%. And any route that is not hitting that, we make adjustments to with each service change. And then we also do detailed on-time performance analysis, stop to stop once a year or so, and make adjustments to the routes and the run times based on that as well.
All right,
I just had just one comment to kind of focus on how the data drives our decision making. So the presentation on 280 was a great example of finding a trend where Saturday is different than Sunday. And the next step is, because we're dealing with humans, with our bus operators, there's a behavior element that actually takes place. So the next step is not to just look at the data and say, oh, we need to add more travel time because there's something going on. It's kind of a next step investigation of maybe going out into the field, seeing what's out there, seeing what's causing a higher dwell time, talking to bus operators directly. And so that's where the big data might guide us to a certain path. And then there's more investigation needed. So that's kind of what how we like to use big data is, like it's a starting point, and then we dig into it and find those kind of solutions to the problem.
All right, thanks so much, Josh. With that, the next piece is really the next chat is a comment, but let's move on to our poll questions. Kathleen, if you'd like to put those up before we get to our next speaker. So question 5 is in achieving mobility as a service, which application is the most attractive to you? So thinking about the connections between, again, transit and other modes of transportation, on-demand services, universal payment methods, real-time public transit information, autonomous vehicles, and new travel modes like shuttles, fixed routes shuttles and such. All right, with about 52% participating, we have autonomous vehicles and new travel modes. So new ways in which we can incorporate new ideas, new technologies within our transportation system to improve sort of those connections between them. And our next question, Kathleen, question 6, getting you ready for our next speaker. So what modes of transportation would you be willing to take for your daily commute? So the TNCs, bus, transit, so moving across all scooters, van pools. Transit, I think we're thinking more rail, light rail, which HNTB has been very good at putting in new shuttles and light rail systems throughout Southern California. The new one is the Orange County line, is that correct? If I'm right on that one?
Yes, thank you.
Bringing back our our old light rail system.
Orange County streetcar.
Yeah, streetcar. All righty. And so again, these streetcars and these other modes of connecting, so thinking about, again, mobility as a service and the different modes of transportation that are out there to improve connections throughout communities. And with that, we'd like to bring in our next speaker into our room, Antoinette Meyer from SANDAG, the Director of Mobility and Innovation. Antoinette, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. And before I jump in, I just want to commend the student researchers who did a really great job on their presentations. So when you are done with school, be sure to send your resumes to SANDAG. We are always looking for data scientists and folks who know how to do research and use data to inform our planning efforts. So let me share my screen.
The Inland Empire is part of the Southern California Association of Governments, and SANDAG and San Diego have their own association of governments to really manage the planning within their region. So they are, not within the whole SCAG region, which includes Ventura, San Bernardino, Riverside, Orange, Los Angeles, and Imperial counties. It's a very large region in which the SANDAG or the SCAG MPO works with. Alrighty.
Thank you for that overview. Okay, so yes, I am the outsider on the panel today. I'm with SANDAG, and we include 18 cities within the County of San Diego and the County of San Diego. And we're governed by a board of directors made up of elected officials from each of those jurisdictions. So mayor or council member from each of the cities, and a county board of supervisors members from the County of San Diego. And the transit agencies you heard from earlier, they're operators, but SANDAG is, we plan, we design, and we build transportation projects, but we do very little operations here. So one of the most important things that we do, though, is to develop the region's long-range transportation plan. And this is federally and state mandated. It's the blueprint for how the region will grow and how the transportation system will develop. It lays out a plan for investing billions of dollars in transportation projects and programs and services over the next 30 years. And it has to be updated every 4 years to comply with federal and state law. So today I'm going to talk about the current 2021 regional plan that we will be bringing to our board to hopefully adopt later this year in December. And it's really completely different from any plan that we have developed in the past. And one of the major reasons for that is that we didn't simply just kind of update the projects that had been in the plan for years. We started from scratch. We looked at data, analyzed how people want to and need to move around the region, and we designed a transportation system that would help improve those connections while really minimizing the impact on the environment and making sure that we were providing equitable access to all communities. So there are a variety of state and federal laws that the regional plan has to comply with, laws related to the environment and air quality and equity. But probably one of the most difficult laws to achieve is what's called Senate Bill 375. That's a state law that requires us to demonstrate how our regional plan, all of the investments that we're proposing in our regional plan, will achieve a 19% per person reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2035. And we have to achieve that reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by reducing vehicle miles traveled. So essentially, we need people to drive 19% less by 2035. And that's really difficult to do when you don't have compelling alternatives to the automobile, when you don't have public transportation options that can get people to where they need to go when they need to go there. So the challenges that we have and the goals specifically that we developed for this 2021 plan is, first and foremost, we have to reduce congestion, and we have to do that by getting people out of their cars. Currently today, our public transit system doesn't meet the needs of most people. So if you have the option to drive, you're likely going to choose driving because it'll get you there faster. It's more comfortable, it's more convenient. We also need to ensure that we are creating access to opportunity, ensuring that all communities have transportation options to reach jobs and schools and critical services. And today we're not doing a great job of that. People who rely on transit oftentimes takes them 2, 3, 4 times as long to get to where they need to go if the transit system gets them there at all. And then we need a cleaner transportation system. We need to reduce our impact on climate change and sea level rise. Transportation is the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So we need to do a better job of getting alternatives to people so that we can reduce our impact on the environment. So our strategy that we came up with for achieving these goals is what we call the 5 big moves. And the 5 big moves work together to create a complete mobility as a service transportation experience. So we start with complete corridors, and complete corridors are roadways that accommodate all modes of transportation equally, safely. They're multimodal and they use technology to manage how the roadways are used at different times of the day. Transit Leap is a major investment in high speed, high frequency, high capacity transit service that can compete with the automobile. Mobility hubs are those communities where all of these transportation options come together seamlessly. It's safe, it's easy, it's comfortable to get around without an automobile. There's a mix of land uses. These are the places, the activity centers that you want to be. Flexible fleets are those app-enabled shared mobility services, everything from shared bikes and scooters on up to microtransit. And then next operating system is what we call the brain of the transportation system. This is really a digital platform that uses data to integrate modes of transportation and manage how the transportation system is used. It's really what makes the glue that keeps everything together, and it's what makes this vision for the future of transportation work. So let's just look at how the 5 big moves come together conceptually in the San Diego region. So this is how a typical highway corridor could be transformed into a complete corridor. You see that we've got all modes accommodated. We've got our Transit Leap services. Our commuter rail service is running alongside the freeway there. We have dedicated lanes for our rapid bus service on the highway. We've got safe infrastructure for people using bikes and scooters and micromobility. Our local roads have microtransit and amenities at the transit station that really makes transit a more kind of first-class experience. And then the next operating system here is managing how the lanes are used at different times of day. So, you could have one lane during the peak period that's dedicated to transit and higher occupancy vehicle modes, or maybe at certain times of the day you want to be able to dedicate a lane to freight. Or when there's an incident, you need to restrict access to that lane to emergency vehicles. So that's the next operating system in the background, using data to manage the system. It's really maximizing the investment that we've already made in infrastructure, creating capacity without having to expand roadways even more. And here's an example of a mobility hub. This is a very urban example of a mobility hub. Not all of them look like this. They can be in smaller communities as well. But at their core, these are communities that have a variety of transportation options. They have good infrastructure, safe infrastructure for smaller modes and for people walking. They have a lot of amenities that make taking transit a more enjoyable experience. And technology is working in the background here, technology and data as well. It's providing real-time information to trip planning tools like kiosks that are at the transit station, or applications that you would use to plan, book, and pay for your trip. It's making our signalized intersections smarter so that they can respond to different modes. Maybe you want to give the transit priority at the intersection, or you need to give people a little bit more time to cross the intersection. Smart intersections can do that. It's managing the curb. You have a lot of competing demands for the curb these days. So you can use technology and data to manage how the curb is used so that it can accommodate all of those demands and do it in a safe way. So in order to take these concepts then and turn it into a plan for transportation, an actual network, we had to look at a lot of different big data sources. And we started with where people live and where people work, because commute trips are about 30% of all trips in our region, and they tend to be more predictable trips, right? Same time of days, generally speaking, same day of week. And so they're easier to solve for. So the map on the left is where people live in our region. The darker the color, the more people that live within that community. The map in the middle is what we call our employment center. So that's where the majority of the jobs are in our region. And again, the darker the color, the more jobs. And then the map on the right is the connection between the two. So what you see there is those darker lines are where we have higher volumes of trips, more people traveling along that corridor. And you see that we really have a significant amount of travel along our north-south corridors, going to those major job centers in downtown San Diego, up in Sereno Valley, where we have kind of a tech hub, and University Town Center, biotech. Those are some of the highest paying jobs in the region. There's a lot of people that travel there on a daily basis. Work trips are just part of the trips, though, that people need to make. And we did the same type of analysis for other major trip generators and activity centers and major destinations. So our military bases, for example, those are major employment centers on their own. We looked at how people are traveling to the military bases. Our border, we have many people crossing the border every day. So we looked at those trips. Our beaches, our parks, SeaWorld, the zoo, all of those kind of major destinations, we did this type of analysis for. And while it's important to look at that observed data, it's also really important to understand the transportation needs of the public. So we used a new approach to doing outreach and getting information from the public, human-centered design. And this is something that private companies, tech companies have used for a long time to develop user-friendly products. We used this method to really understand people's challenges with transportation, their needs with transportation, and then to test concepts and ideas with people so that we were coming up with a transportation system that's actually going to work for people. We did focus groups, we did interviews, we did intercept surveys, one-on-one conversations. It was a really, really effective way at reaching people who don't normally participate in the planning process and getting very rich data from the public. And then what all of this data analysis allowed us to eventually do is to create this integrated transportation system. So starting with here, these are our mobility hubs. There's 31 mobility hubs throughout the region. And I want to clarify, mobility hubs aren't just a transit station. For us, it's the complete community, right? Because if people can't access that transit station, then they're not likely to be able to use it. So when we talk about community hubs, you see that these are kind of larger blobs on the map, but we feel like it's really important to ensure that we've got those connections beyond just the area around the transit station. Then you layer in the local and express bus services and stops, and you'll see that within those community those mobility hubs and connecting those mobility hubs, we have a significant amount of regular local bus, express bus, and microtransit. On-demand microtransit is definitely a part of our plan. Then you layer in what we call complete corridors, and this is that system of managed lanes so that we can start to have lanes that are dedicated to transit, giving them more priority, ensuring that they're more reliable and on time. Then we layer in those next generation rapid services that are taking advantage of those managed lanes, that are taking advantage of those smart intersections that give them priority so they can get through more quickly and operate a lot like rail in many ways. Then our light rail system, which is the trolley that we have today and the Sprinter line that we have today, we're going to speed that up as well. And we're going to extend the hours of service. What we heard from people through those interviews and focus groups was, they work late into the evening when transit isn't available or early morning. So we need to have a transit system that doesn't just meet the needs of the 9-to-5 commuter, but that meets the needs of folks that are working in hospitality and other industries, medical industry. And then last is our commuter rail. This is high-speed rail that operates either in tunnels, it's grade separated, or above ground, so that doesn't have to compete with traffic on the roadways. And this is really good for those longer trips that I showed you. We were looking at the data, a lot of people traveling from down by the border all the way up to downtown San Diego and our major job centers. So that is the complete integrated system that we developed for the future. It creates thousands of connections that don't exist today. So we're pretty excited about this. And then what can't be shown as a line on the map is the next operating system. But this illustration really helps to demonstrate, how it works. Essentially, it's a data exchange, right? It's ingesting data from smart infrastructure, from public and private transportation services, from apps, and then it's using that data to provide better real-time information to people traveling around the region, better tools, applications that would actually allow for mobility as a service instead of having to have 6 different transportation apps on your phone, Uber and Lyft and scooter share and public transit. It would have everything in one, so you can plan that complete multimodal trip, book it, pay for it very easily. It provides operators with better information, so our transit operators can make changes to services more quickly, as opposed to waiting for static data sets to analyze. And then, of course, for planners and policymakers like many of us, having access to this information makes our jobs much easier. We can identify solutions more quickly when we have access to real-time data. So let's just look at how this new system, the next operating system, combined with the other 5 big moves, can make the life of an average commuter in the San Diego region so much easier. So this is Laura. Laura lives in Southeast San Diego. She works for Sharp Healthcare in Sereno Valley. She and her husband share a car, and he often needs the car for work. And they also need a car to be able to take their kids to school and to daycare on a daily basis. And today, Laura's got very few options for how to get to work. Because she's in the medical industry, her hours can vary. Sometimes she's working late at night, sometimes she's working really early in the morning when transit isn't there. And even when she does have access to the car and she drives to work, it's an unpredictable trip because there's no express lanes or managed lanes that she can use. So she's really quite limited today. But in the future, under the 5 big moves concept, she'll have a lot of options. She could take a pooled ride, hail a rideshare vehicle, and travel in the express lanes and get there pretty quickly. She can take commuter rail, and her employer subsidizes her transit pass. So that's actually a free option for her, and it's quite fast. And she could choose to drive alone if that's convenient, and she can pay to use the managed lanes and pay to park. So that's the more expensive option. But Laura chooses the transit trip because it's fast and it's cost effective for her. So now Laura's son doesn't need to be dropped off at school because there's safe, complete corridor infrastructure, and he can ride his bike to school, and she gets a little notice on her app when he arrives there safely. She can use Wi-Fi on the train and get things done, like ordering groceries and having them delivered to a food locker at the transit station for her to pick up when she's coming home from work. And there's daycare in the mobility hub where she works, so she can have her daughter on the train with her and drop her off at daycare and then pick her up again before she gets onto the commuter rail in the afternoon. So that's the experience that we want everyone to have. We want transportation to be easy, to be convenient, and even enjoyable experience. It should get you to where you need to go quickly. It shouldn't be a hindrance to accessing jobs and other services. So hopefully you're getting a little bit excited about this vision for the future of transportation as well. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have about how we're using data to plan, but also how data is really essential to operating transportation and creating mobility as a service environment in the future.
All righty. Thank you, Antoinette. That was great. It was a real, was a perfect wrap up of bringing together all of these ideas on data and public transit. So with that, let's do our last question. So what do you see as the larger challenges to mobility as a service? Time to travel, distances, geography, that's one of the things that we deal, as you heard from our transit partners. Data sharing between public and private sectors, and then if there are any other pieces, and if you'd be willing to share what that other might be, we'd love to hear it. So the time to travel is one of the greatest issues, of course, as we know, and as we saw from the example of Laura, who I lived in San Diego for many years. I understand that going from, you would think it's not that far to get from Southeast San Diego to sort of parts of the northern part of the county, or the northern part. It's a long time now. Used to be able to get anywhere in San Diego in 15 minutes, and that no longer exists. So really that time to travel is an important piece for all of us. Okay, I'd like to open up then the discussion for questions and answers to talk about the issues and how do we deal with these ideas of mobility as a service, sort of the big goal for the Inland Empire. How do we get there? I'd like to put that challenge out for us today.
Dr. Ho had his hand raised. Did you want to share, Dr. Ho, for the other?
Yes, well, I just want to say that I'm sold for this 5 big moves. I'm very excited with this vision, but I think the major challenge will be the policy decision, like who will really implement this or who will manage and monitor all the systems. So in my opinion, maybe for mobility as a service, policy decisions or a government involvement will be essential to make things move forward.
Thank you, Yunfei. And Yunfei is the faculty director of our research challenge. So he is working with those students to get their projects and the deliverables from that project, going forward. So thank you. Carrie Witt, you have your HNTB.
Thank you. Good morning. And I apologize. I'm having camera problems and so can't be actually with you all, but I'm here with you, at least part of me. I wanted to comment. I'm one of the people that answered other to that question. And one of the things I find is those of us who work in the industry understand what mobility as a service is. And I think when you get outside of the circle of people who work in the industry and are actively engaged in this, you talk about mobility, first of all, let alone mobility as a service, and kind of get blank stares from people. You say the word mobility and a lot of people think of disabled access and things like that. And so I think we as an industry have some communication work to do. And then I think once there's an understanding of what mobility as a service is, people are intrigued, but it sounds really complex. And they're like, wow, I just don't know, and I think it's kind of like the adoption of the TNCs over the last 5 years. Once you do it, it's pretty cool and it's really not that hard. And even the average person can figure it out. But I think right now the discussion about mobility as a service is pretty limited to those of us who work in the industry. It's just an observation. Interested in the panelists' thoughts on that.
Thank you, Carrie. Antoinette, Josh, Jeremiah, Kristen, and students.
Sure. I'm happy to chime in on that, and I agree with Carrie that mobility as a service is kind of a wonky term, but when you talk to people, what they want out of public transportation is convenience, right? They want something that's easy, and that's the intent behind mobility as a service. Right now, it's not easy, right? If you don't live close enough to transit to be able to walk there and you need to hail a ride, you've got to use multiple applications, you have to pay for those trips separately. So it really is a deterrent to making that trip via transit. But if we can simplify that for people and we can say all of this data is going to be aggregated and integrated into a single app, and now all you simply need to do is go on and say, this is where I want to go, and we'll give you some options and you choose the option that works for you, whether it's based on cost or distance, time. It'll be really easy for you to make those decisions. So I think that there's just a ton of potential for mobility as a service, but it's extremely challenging. And the biggest challenge, in my opinion, when we went through that list is actually the data sharing. That doesn't happen right now, right? The private sector doesn't share data with the public sector. And so until we're able to overcome that barrier, until we're able to have really effective public-private partnerships, it's going to be very difficult to achieve mobility as a service.
Thank you for that. And sometimes even public agencies don't share with other public agencies. So
exactly.
It's figuring out how to get past some of those proprietary issues and dealing with the data. Greg, please.
Quick question for any of the panelists. At least in my mind, no discussion of mobility can exist without a parallel discussion about politics and political reality. In terms of either jurisdictional boundaries or in terms of groups that want new freeways or expanded freeways as opposed to transit and other modes. So I'd be interested in the panelists in terms of your experiences of how to best deal with those issues and incorporate that type of feedback so you can successfully move your plan forward?
I'll chime in. So I think kind of to address that is sometimes there are those conflicting interests, and I think it takes the partnership. So I live in Chino Hills, so I'm kind of leaning to our Omnitrans folks. They have a partnership with Chino Hills for the microtransit. And I think it depends on creating that environment where you have one of those cities step up and kind of take, kind of some skin in the game and some involvement in that, because it's not just on Omnitrans to market and promote. It has to kind of come from all avenues to really grow that type of idea. And also, I think I was thinking of Yunfei's comment related to some kind of policies on mobility as a service, and then even what Antoinette was saying is there has to be an improved private-public partnership. Thinking of her presentation related to the mother with the childcare, the food delivery, we can take people from A to B. We're not in the grocery delivery business yet, or kind of the childcare, but it takes those partnerships of having multiple private entities come together and identify the location, even from the, kind of the various steps with kind of our federal funding. If there's ways for private companies to come in, assist with some of that development of those hubs, for example, and then, build that infrastructure, I think it could be done a lot quicker than some of the hoops we have to jump through. But I think it takes, us in the transit world, we've got some great ideas, and a lot of times they get stalled in that process. So if there's a way to expedite it and kind of work with multiple, private partners and public partners, I think that's the way to do it. And so I know Jeremiah chimed in, so I don't know if you want to, fill in on that.
I think Josh hit it pretty well. I think the issue as we look at jurisdictional boundaries goes back to issues tied to what are our policy objectives. I mean, I think policy objectives and using the data to support those policy objectives are critical. In many cases, I think if we look at our service area, very similar to RTAs and to some extent to Foothills, we all serve a number of cities, not necessarily with one dominant city, which is different than perhaps the San Diego example. And as a result, we all have boards that are 15, 20 something members, and the trade-offs between how you invest is very much aligned with the equity that Kristen talked about, and how RTA puts out amenities. So I think we have to look at our data and our resources to make sure that we're making the right investments, sort of without regard to jurisdictional lines, but realizing that jurisdictional lines and trade-offs between modes is very much omnipresent, and something we always need to adjust to.
Thank you.
I also think, if I could just add one thing, one of the ways that RTA has found to sort of break down some of these barriers is partner on grants. When you're talking about funding and you come together, transit, whether it be transit and a developer or transit and a city, when you partner on a grant and you have funding involved, it really tends to carry the project forward. One of our transit centers that I'm working on right now, we have a couple of years of affordable housing, sustainable communities funding that we partnered with the city of Riverside and a developer on, and it's really helped to move the transit center forward, a project that's been in the works for 17 years, because we have these grants and these timelines that we have to meet. So finding funding, partnering on funding, and then moving the projects forward according to the timelines that you have with that funding also really helps to move things from our perspective.
Yeah, both of those pieces, Jeremiah and Kristen, really make me, and then, thinking about, again, Sandag and the San Diego region, sometimes it's great when you have a large partner in the room, but sometimes it also inhibits some of the issues in the outskirts regions. Let's talk about, because you have San Diego. The city is a very powerful entity, and so the balance of power sometimes can be shifted, and we even see that in SCAG and the difference between LA and Orange County and the San Bernardino and Riverside areas and how they negotiate. And I'll leave, Ventura, the two outskirts, Ventura and Imperial out there, but some even the negotiations within these large agencies. But it brings forward sort of this piece, creating cooperation or collaboration among agencies. And yes, coming around writing a grant, but other ways to think about how collaboration can be developed between agencies and among agencies is an important concept that maybe we can think about in how we can create sort of that larger region of connections between transportation. Because I know that each of the agencies talk to each other. You all, you know each other. You have these informal, just personal, colleagues and working in the field. But really thinking about how do we collaborate all of our agencies and bring them together. Kristen brings a really great point there to make it work for our region. I don't know if Doran, you want to chime in on this, or Jeremiah, Aaron, if you're there, if you have anything to say, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, Dr. Collins, Doran Barnes here, CEO at Foothill Transit. And I think your point about how we use data and how we work together, to me, one of the great things about the transit space in particular is that, we really do work together as one big family, if you will, coordinating, connecting. Unlike other industry segments, we're all trying to work towards the same goals. We're not competing with each other. So if our friends at Omnitrans have a great approach to something, we love to be able to learn about it and steal it. And if we have something that we can offer that goes the opposite direction. So it's really about making the entire system stronger. And at the same time, all of us really struggling with how do we make all this stuff work? We've talked a bit about the complexities of mobility on demand and how it sounds complicated. And I'll say, as someone who's worked in this space for a long time, I still think it's complicated. And that just means we've got more work to do to figure out how to really serve the community. That's what it's all about.
I would echo Doran's comments. I think one of the great things about working in public transit is there's incredible cooperation and collaboration between transit partners, and sort of sticking with the concept of data and collaboration. One thing that Foothill has joined recently that we've been a member of for a little while is the American Bus Benchmarking Group, which is a group of 20-something mid-sized agencies where we share data constantly. There's constant collaboration through that group, and it really started as a data benchmarking where we could learn best practices from each other. It's an organization throughout the U.S. That's facilitated through a different university, but really has really brought a lot of best practices learning to us. And again, just as Doran said, we can beg, borrow, and steal from each other, and in a lot of ways, it's implemented in a way where I know we've implemented things based on things I've seen happen in Florida or things I've seen happen in Ohio. And it's great, as we've seen with the ABBG, other local entities join. OCTA has joined within the last few years. Foothill's joined within the last few years. So we're getting some more regional perspective besides just the national perspective, which ultimately allows us to see other ways to see growth.
And is rail, or is Metrolink and Amtrak or some of the other rail providers part of that, or is it just really looking at bus?
So in this one, the ABBG is specifically looking at mid-sized bus operators. This group, the group is facilitated by Imperial College out of London, which has a fairly extensive benchmarking groups, which also include rail, light rail, suburban rail. There's an international bus benchmarking group. There's an airport group. And I think one of the things that's been really critical during the COVID time period is the groups generally have not had that much crossover, but there's been a lot of sharing of how everyone's responding to COVID across the groups, where we've learned a lot from the international groups, which have some of the largest transit agencies in the world sharing their best practices. So it's really provided a lot of insight.
All right, thank you so much for that. Governance issues.
Right, Dr. Collins, this is Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm the CEO and General Manager for Omnitrans. I would just add to I agree with everything that's been said, and I do think we do a good job coordinating. We coordinate with our service changes. We make sure people can make connections. We make sure we have good connections from county to county. We do work with Metrolink on cross-promotional marketing opportunities. We're trying to enhance those connections. But two things that really stood out to me this morning are, you know, in Antoinette's presentation, there's a hard goal there, right? They're saying this % reduction. And then Greg brought up the idea of political, you know, policies and agendas, and we can do better. You know, I mean, we can do better getting buy-in and making sure people understand that they can make those trips and try to make the travel time more competitive. And I think it's really a challenge because of the sprawl and, you know, the long distances people are traveling. But I think for it to happen in this region, we're going to have to do better than what we're doing.
Thank you, Erin, for that. So I'd like to open it up. How can we do better? Maybe we can, you know, not solve it today, but really think about some ideas on how to bring it together. And I don't know, just throw it out there to our group, ideas.
We had a question in the chat, Dr. Collins, from Sanjay. It says, is it possible to more than just the webinars, are tools shared? Is the data and software open sourced?
So it looked like that was about ABVG. So one of the things for ABVG that makes it special is, quite frankly, all of the data shared between the transit agencies is covered by an NDA. That's part of why it's facilitated in the way that it is. And the reason why we do that is, amongst the transit agencies, we want to make sure that we have really the most open, honest data sharing possible. A lot of times, if the data we share is completely available to everyone, we'll be very reluctant to share the things that didn't go well. Here, by being covered by the non-disclosure agreement, we can share the things that don't go well in addition to the things that go well, so we can learn from both cases.
Again, thoughts on how we can do better within this realm? Do we have any sort of initial observations? Or Sanjeev, you have a piece, and I don't know if any of our students, and sort of being outside observers, have seen anything as they started their research process to provide.
I just say, yeah, thank you. I think it's excellent that there's all this sharing going on between transit agencies. It's really excellent to hear. And I just worry that you know, it's about sharing best practices, but you could do more if you know, tools were shared and so on, and software that is created by one agency was reused by another and so on. So that was my sort of second part to my comment there. Thanks.
I'm happy to chime in on a few things that I think we can do to make it better, but often these things that improve transit are not politically popular. So you noticed in my presentation, a lot of what we're trying to do to make transit better is to provide more dedicated space to transit. And that can mean taking space away from cars, right? So the curb, for example, has been historically used to park and store cars. And now there are a lot more demands and maybe better uses for the curb space. But that's very unpopular politically, right? When you start talking about turning a curb lane into a bus and bike lane, you wouldn't believe how difficult of a conversation that is. And so, I mean, that's just one way, is just providing that dedicated infrastructure, giving transit, given higher occupancy modes, giving bikes and pedestrians dedicated infrastructure. The other thing is investing in digital infrastructure, and that's not something that we've done a whole lot of, right? But if we want to be able to collect more data and use that data to make the system better, then we need to start making that investment in digital infrastructure and treating it similarly to the way that we treat our hard infrastructure. So those are two areas for improvement that I'd like to throw out there for discussion.
Yeah, and part of maybe the, and I don't know if, I don't want to put him on the spot, but Kirk Lewis, if you have any thoughts on the new infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress and signed, if there's any piece in there to really work on sort of that. Again, we look at the digital divide, we look at sort of the digital infrastructure, as Antoinette just brought forward for us. How do we make that work better within our region as well?
I just want to say how impressed I was to hear about the way data is being used for big decisions and even the smaller ones. It's really impressive to see that. And you know, I do use the transit systems in our area, use them quite frequently, and I'm glad to see that there's thoughts going into that. In terms of the bill, there is always legislation coming up. I don't know all the exact specifics of the things you're talking about, Dr. Collins, but I do know that there is a letter going around now. I don't know if you're familiar with it, letter to the secretary for just to begin planning for the Olympics. Olympics is coming in, what, 4 years now, 5 years? And there's a letter going around, and I don't know if you were familiar with it. It's going to the secretary, and I want to send something to you about it so you'll be aware of it. I think it's through SCAG, and they're asking, what can we do as a region to prepare? What kind of studies that we need to have? With the data that you are collecting now, is it going to be helpful, and how can it be useful? I'm sure it will be. But I'll get back with you on that. But when more things are available in terms of the transportation issues, we did provide, the Congressman authorized several projects for transportation in his community funding act projects this year. This is the first time that Congress was able to make decisions on projects in the area, and he selected 4 or 5 major transportation projects. So there should be some improvements coming along the way in those areas, and he'll talk about those later. But I'm happy to be here, and we'll keep in touch with you.
All right. Thank you, Kurt, for being here. Again, and we'll see, I know that the digital divide, particularly, I mean, for one who was working on digital divide issues a long time ago, I won't say how long because that'll really age me, but working on digital divide issues and thinking that 30 years later, we're still talking about the digital divide. There's an issue there. There's really a need to think about our digital infrastructure and how it can support the future growth of new transportation modes. I think that highway that Antoinette showed us is very much reliant upon a good digital infrastructure. And if we don't have it, how are we really going to move these new technologies forward? And as you all said within the poll questions, that is what you're looking in thinking about mobility as a service and having those linkages between multiple modes of transport. We need that service. So it's an important piece. It's also a huge amount of investment. And there is, as we watch the controversy of 5G being implemented, does not go without a controversy. Other questions or thoughts on how we can move this conversation forward in our last few minutes of the dialogue this morning?
Okay. Gerardo says position transit service within street roadway network are equal to footing or at an advantage as to be a competitive mode of transportation. Highway projects, at times fail to include access to the bus and thus hinder public transit's performance by highway design. The calculus to ride transit includes how much more time a transit rider must invest in typical transit trip versus a personal vehicle trip. There is room for improvement. Speed and cost are basic calculating factors to favor transit. And then that was just an analysis of his. And then Rafi had a question. My question is for Mrs. Meyer, how we can move these strategies to rural areas or less developed areas. Sorry.
Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge is providing transit service to rural communities when you just don't have the population to support these, fixed route, high capacity, high frequency transit lines. And, the other thing is that we don't really want to induce a whole lot of growth in rural areas in the backcountry, right? So we want those areas to stay rural, and we want the growth to occur, in the urbanized parts of the region. But there are transportation solutions that work well in rural areas. And one example, it's not new. It's not, a new mobility service. It's our van pool program, and it's been providing great transportation option to rural communities for many years. We've got, I'm not sure where we're at right now, after COVID, but prior to COVID, we had well over 700 van pools that were traveling long distances, some of them coming from, Riverside County down into San Diego County on a daily basis and transporting, 5 to 7 residents that, live primarily in rural or very suburban areas that aren't well served by traditional public transportation. So that's one thing. I think the other thing for rural corridors, we have a lot of safety issues on our rural corridors. And so there are intelligent transportation solutions that can improve safety, right, on rural corridors. So that's another investment that we're proposing. But again, that goes back to what Dr. Collins was talking about and having that broadband infrastructure in place. You need connectivity in order to be able to operate intelligent transportation solutions. And right now, our rural communities are unconnected. So one of our strategies is to address the digital divide so we can provide these technology solutions in the future that can make transportation more safe, that can get better real-time information out to our rural communities as well, and can help us to deal with evacuations when there's fires or rerouting traffic when there's a major incident.
I had a comment for Gerardo's maybe more his comment related to design and roadway. In our service area, we have the El Monte Busway, which connects El Monte Transit Center to Union Station in downtown LA. And I think in its conceptual design, it was intended for buses to travel on. And now it's the HOV lane. So now cars can pay a premium and cars share that busway with us. So I think to answer that comment of making transit more appealing and kind of even to some of the street design is you really need kind of a fierce political kind of politician to come in and say no more street parking and kind of really make transit a priority. But yes, we want to get rid of the cars and make it just for buses because then it'll be great. That's probably not going to happen. But I think until we get to some sort of step where there's infrastructure and kind of the political backing to allow for those things to happen, that incentivizes, the transit ridership, because then we're competing with that same speed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a piece that I really noted from the presentation by Antoinette as well, is the use of our roadways and sort of the design and thoughts of how we use our roads. I mean, even the controversy that comes in building the toll roads or building the roads, changing those lanes from carpool lanes into into a toll service. Even that has been difficult at times, and we've addressed those in other dialogues. So thinking about how do we even reduce some of the lanes to have as that dedicated truck lane, which is definitely needed. Anyone who has gone through the 10 or through the Inland Empire and that logistics corridor that we have, we need to figure out what to do with all of those heavy duty vehicles that are out there. And so, there's that one side, but also the transit side. How do we get people through? I know that there have been some advocates in not thinking about building out more rail, but just as Josh said, taking those lanes on the freeway and really creating a rail through the bus system itself. We saw that partly, from the San Fernando Valley, the Orange Line that comes into LA, really taking sort of a dedicated bus lane to move rapid bus transit through. So it's something that, and I don't know, I don't want to put Greg on the spot either, but something to really think about. How do we get there? How do we really reconceptualize our freeways? I don't know if HNTB, which is really a leader in thinking about this infrastructure from that hard construction piece, if there's any conversation or ideas that are coming from our private sector partners.
We do have another question in the chat too, whenever you're ready, Dr. Collins.
Okay, so you'll have to ask that. But Greg, you wanted to, sorry, and I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but
no, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, and we're actively working with Sandag on their 5 big moves, and they're just a great partner to work with Antoinette and that team there. And also other places of the country, for example, in Columbus, we're working on what's called Smart Columbus, which includes a lot of aspects that we've talked about today, as well as digitizing the, having access for everyone to the information they need to be able to effectively move in and around the community. So there are a lot of activities in place around the country, just like we're talking about today.
Okay.
Can you read the question again? Sorry, I'm having.
I got it. It's from Robert Manisiak. Is the example of NextOS, is this considered a third-party owned and operated app that helps Sandag, or will Sandag own the app and the data rights? Are special limitations in place that limit how Sandag can use data as opposed to the way a private sector could use data, or is it an equal playing field?
So first and foremost, I want to clarify the NextOS is not an app. It's a digital platform, right? And data that's aggregated, ingested and aggregated through that platform can be used for other apps, right? So government shouldn't really make apps, in my opinion. We don't do a good job at it, and we should let the private sector do it. They do it much better. But we want to enable better applications. And so that's the intent of the NextOS. So in terms of data privacy and protection of PII, yes, we take that very seriously. Being good stewards of data is absolutely critical. And we have a data governance strategy that we've put in place. We do privacy impact assessments around projects that include the collection of data, potentially sensitive data and PII. And every government agency should be in the practice of doing that. It's important that we protect people's private information. And we have a good strategy in place for how we share data, what data we disclose, and how we protect data.
A whole nother conversation, talking about that, privacy issues and data protection, which needs to be put out there as well. We have time for maybe one last question. I don't know if or one last comment, final words.
Okay, this is from one of our participants, Eckler, last name, I think. Do you think more people would consider transit if they lived closer to their jobs? I know that is not always an option, but with limiting GHG in mind, I think this is important.
Well, if you think about how complicated that can be when you have multiple people in a household, and let's just say a couple living together, and one works in one part of the region, the other works in the other part of the region, trying to identify a location that's close to both of the jobs can be difficult. So, of course, we always want to encourage people to live by where they work, but there's a lot of factors that go into the decision about where you want to live. And oftentimes, once we settle into a community, we're not necessarily interested in just picking up and moving to a new community if our job changes. So that's why we have a variety of transit options in our plan. We've got the longer distance commuter rail that's really fast, rail traveling over 100 miles an hour. So you can make those connections to your job if you don't live nearby more quickly than you would if you were driving. But we have other types of public transportation as well that can accommodate those shorter trips. So we just wanted to be sensitive to the fact that just because we build housing next to jobs doesn't mean that people are going to have the ability to locate next to where they work. But we do want to have an alternative for them so that we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions and we're reducing congestion.
Yeah. As one of the speakers of our dialogues this year talked about, and you can see all of the dialogues and all the proceedings if you missed one on the LTC website. But Dan Sperling was here, Dr. Sperling from Davis, really talking about the need for options and for the need of a variety, diverse system that really gives those who have, different desires, different needs that need to be met, can be met by the transit system by having, again, multiple options within the region. And we have some options, but I think that's one of the pieces of our puzzle that needs to be met, that's missing. How do we build additional options? And that's it's not a cheap proposition. It's easy to throw out there, but it's something, again, thinking about geography and all of the variables that exist and that we saw through a lot of the data presentations today. All of that, bringing it together is, takes a lot of planning and a lot of strategic thinking, and again, investment out there. And I'm hopeful that the new infrastructure bill that has been passed out of Washington will provide additional funds for this region, will really make it so that we can meet those needs. With that, we're 1 minute out. I wanted to thank once again Kathleen for all of her support and all of the great work that she's done with the dialogues. She's been a real gem as we've run this program over the past, well, we're going on 4 years now. And so thank you, Kathleen. We're going to miss you in our rooms in the future, but we know we'll see you around. Thank you all for joining us today. It was really a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you to our students. Great job. Looking forward to the results of your research soon. And we'll see you. We'll see you on the roads. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.